exploring the bioenergy nutrition nexus. So this is a very interesting and also new nexus that we are exploring in the context of the Global Bioenergy Partnership. We know that modern bioenergy has the potential to aid in the achievement of the SDGs when it's managed appropriately and in a sustainable manner. We know that bioenergy is a very important component of low carbon development strategies and is also crucial to ensure energy access for all. We also know that bioenergy is part of the broader bioeconomy, and therefore its use has to be in synergy with other uses of biomass, of feedstocks, including for food, feed, bioproducts, and others. And in this context, the Global Bioenergy Partnership, you know, has been very much focusing on sustainability in order to guarantee that sustainability of bioenergy is achieved. Also because we know that sustainability is the only way to ensure that we take out the best from the opportunities that bioenergy could offer, and at the same time trying to reduce at the utmost the challenges that also bioenergy, when it's not managed in a sustainable manner, could pose. So in context of the Global Bioenergy Partnership, of the Working Group on Capacity Building, and in collaboration with our colleagues in the Food and Nutrition Division in FAO, we have joined forces really to try to make a study on the positive linkages between bioenergy and nutrition, trying to understand what is known and identify also gaps for further work, for further joint action. And it's a pleasure for me to introduce to you all our colleague Patrizia Fracassi from the Food and Nutrition Division in FAO. Patrizia, over to you to introduce our joint effort.
Thank you so much, Michela. My name is Patrizia and I'm Senior Nutrition and Food System Officer in the Food and Nutrition Division. We work in close collaboration with other divisions and partners to provide guidance and support to FAO's members for leveraging all entry points across the agri-food systems to enable healthy diets and better nutrition. We are now witnessing an unprecedented climate, food, energy, and finance crisis that will further exacerbate the situation of the 193 million people facing acute food insecurity, and the nearly 40 million people facing emergency levels of acute food insecurity. This will push further down the achievement of the SDG 2, which is to end hunger and all forms of malnutrition by 2030. So this kind of work, this kind of collaboration is therefore timely, and moving forward on potential opportunities will be a matter of urgency. The 2020 SOFI report defines nutrition security as a situation that exists when secure access to a healthy diet is coupled with a sanitary environment and adequate health services and care in order to ensure a healthy and active life for all household members. Nutrition security differs from food security in that it also considers the aspects of adequate caregiving practices, health and hygiene, in addition to dietary adequacy. So the definition of nutrition security touches upon three underlying causes of malnutrition. One is the household food insecurity, inadequate caring practices, and also unhealthy environment. So the literature that will be presented today is an important contribution to our understanding of how sustainably managed bioenergy as part of the broader bioeconomy can have a positive impact on ensuring nutrition security. It highlights the current research, but also where we need to work together in the future to improve our understanding of these linkages. It also highlights potential opportunity for further collaboration. So without any further delay, I pass the floor to Connie to present the literature review. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Patrizia. I'll just share my screen. Okay, can you see that fine?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So thanks very much. My name's Constance Miller, or Connie Miller, and I'm the lead technical advisor for the Global Bioenergy Partnership with the Secretariat here in FAO. And I'm really happy to be here today to present the literature review that was published by GBEP in April, developed by the Food and Nutrition Division of FAO as a contribution to the programme of work of GBEP. So I'm going to go over the main findings of the literature review today, but I'm not probably going to have time to go into great detail. So I'd really encourage you to go and read the paper on the GBEP website for more details. And we're also going to have time at the end of the webinar for a discussion. So please, if you have any questions whilst I'm going through my presentation, feel free to put those in the chat and we'll be able to have a discussion towards the end. So the main aim of the literature review was to explore the potential positive linkages between bioenergy and nutrition so that they can be brought to the attention of bioenergy and nutrition experts and stakeholders and can then be leveraged in projects and programs to ensure nutrition security. So therefore, the scope was to explore what's already been studied on these linkages, looking particularly at the implications of bioenergy value chains on nutrition, rather than considering the opposite causal implications, let's say that there may be from changes in nutrition and diet on bioenergy value chains. In some cases, other co-benefits of certain bioenergy practices are mentioned where this has been considered appropriate, or also certain safeguards are noted that may need to be put in place to ensure the positive linkages that we're talking about in this research. But they were not the main focus, so it could instead be considered something for further work that we could look to make more concrete recommendations based on this research. It's also worth noting that implications of bioenergy on food security in general were not directly addressed, unless in relation to nutrition or nutrition security components. So this was an exploratory narrative literature review rather than a systematic one, and it explored peer-reviewed literature and also technical papers on the subject. And after an initial search in the literature of potential areas where linkages could be present, the keywords that you can see a few of there on the screen were further refined to identify and explore these specific links. A request was also sent to our GBEP partners and observers. There are over 85 of those around the world for specific national and local case studies, and some of those were also included in the paper. So in total, 47 articles were considered. So after investigating the available literature, it was decided to divide the linkages under the various stages of the bioenergy value chain where these linkages could be found in order to facilitate identification of where interventions could be implemented that enhance nutrition security along bioenergy value chains. So in the diagram, you can see the 3 stages that were identified. So we have biomass production for energy, the use of bioenergy byproducts, and also the use of bioenergy itself. So during the biomass production for bioenergy, there were 3 linkages that were identified: the positive contribution of phytoremediation and integrated biomass production systems on soil quality and nutrition, and also the positive implications on income diversification. Then the paper explores how bioenergy byproducts can also affect soil quality and nutrition, And then finally, the implications of modern bioenergy use on nutrition are examined, looking specifically at the effects of improved cook stoves and clean cooking solutions, and also the role of bioenergy in refrigerated food transport and storage. And then we take each of those stages or practices and we ask what could be the implications for nutrition and nutrition security. So I'll start with the bioenergy production stage, looking at phytoremediation, and I'll go through each of those components separately, but rather quickly, given the time limitations. So phytoremediation is broadly defined as a mechanism for removing contaminants from the soil using green plants. And the biomass from this plant material can then be used for bioenergy. For instance, some perennial energy crops have been shown to be appropriate species for phytoremediation. These include grasses such as miscanthus, or also woody tree species such as poplar or willow. And they can help remediate areas contaminated by, for example, previous industrial activity, or they could be used as buffer zones to reduce leaching from contaminated areas into nearby soil and groundwater. Similarly, you have some wetland species such as water hyacinth that can be used to remove contaminants from wastewater, allowing then for its use in irrigated cropland. And the biomass from the harvesting of these plants can then be used to produce energy, although obviously special attention has to be paid to ensure the proper disposal of the contaminants within this biomass. So in terms of nutrition implications, these systems can have multiple indirect positive implications on nutrition, from the improvements to the soil and water quality. So for example, they can reduce heavy metals in the soil that can interact with human health and nutrition via both plants and animals. They reduce contamination of groundwater for drinking. They can also have an impact on food quality by improving its safety and its marketability. And it can also increase land usability for agricultural production. One point to note on this linkage here is that phytoremediation needs to be carefully planned to avoid potential adverse impacts to the ecosystem in terms of potentially biodiversity, nutrients and water availability. And this can be done through the selection of appropriate plants and areas for this intervention. Secondly, I'd like to talk about integrated biomass production systems. So biomass for energy can be produced as part of multiple cropping systems where biomass is produced for multiple purposes. In other words, not just for food, but also potentially feed, fiber, and also energy. And these can include many different types of systems, such as crop rotations, flexible cropping, intercropping, and also agroforestry. And the addition of multiple cropping for bioenergy purposes can have indirect positive implications for nutrition, as they can mitigate land use impacts and enhance ecosystem services, and therefore improving the potential of agricultural ecosystems to produce nutritious food. For example, they may reduce pressures on local forest resources or local forest ecosystems for the harvesting of biomass for bioenergy. The introduction of multiple cropping systems compared with, again, a monoculture approach, let's say, can also have positive impacts on soil quality. I'll give a couple of examples here. You can see them on the slide, although obviously the interactions here are very varied in each case, and the positive impacts could be different depending on the system being chosen. For example, cover crops can minimize weeds that draw nutrients and water from the soil and reduce the need and therefore reduce the need for herbicides. And energy crops can also be specifically selected for their soil fertility enhancing properties. For example, nitrogen fixing species such as Glycidia. And finally, under this first stage of bioenergy production, although the link here is much less direct, the paper also mentions the positive impact that biomass production for bioenergy can have on livelihoods and diversification of income of rural and low-income communities. So this links with the idea of the integrated biomass production systems in the previous slide. For example, people may be able to grow and sell energy crops alongside their food crops, or on marginal and degraded land that is not currently suitable for food crops, or through the leasing of this land for energy crop production. It could also come from the use of residues and wastes for bioenergy production from the agricultural system. The use or sale of the consequent biomass for energy can decrease household energy expenditure and or increase income, depending on whether it's being used by the household or being sold. It also represents a diversified income source that can therefore improve the resilience of rural households to shocks. So in terms of nutrition implications, additional income could enable households to afford foods that they previously could not, leading to greater dietary diversity. And also the enhanced resilience could mean that they're less likely to have to take up negative coping strategies, such as, for example, eating less food or less nutritious food after negative shocks. So now I'll move on to byproducts of bioenergy production. So a couple of examples of byproducts of bioenergy production that were looked at in the paper. We have gasification and pyrolysis, which are used for dry biomass, and they produce a byproduct called biochar. Whereas we have anaerobic digestion of wet biomass, which produces biogas, and as a byproduct, digestate. So both of these byproducts can be used as soil amendment to improve soil health through enhancements of chemical and physical properties, promotion of biological function, and also detoxifying of contaminants. I'm not going to go into too much detail here, as my colleague Tiziana, who will be presenting after me, will talk a little bit more in detail about these byproducts and the value chains. But I want to mention here that we talk about byproducts improving the soil quality and therefore imply that this has a positive impact on nutrition. Obviously, soil security is necessary for nutrition security, and soil degradation can have both direct and indirect impacts on food and nutrition security. However, this link between soil quality and nutrition is one of the areas where the paper finds that more specific research could be really useful. And now I'll move on to how the use of bioenergy, of modern bioenergy, can have positive impacts on nutrition. So modern bioenergy represents one of the elements of the transition away from traditional bioenergy use, and by traditional bioenergy use, we define the inefficient use of wood fuel for cooking and heating. And through the use of improved biomass cook stoves and other clean cooking solutions, such as biogas or ethanol cook stoves. So this positive transition can have, this transition from traditional bioenergy to modern bioenergy can have positive impacts not only on health through the reduction in household air pollution, which also has a strong gender factor in terms of women and children being most highly affected by those health impacts, but can also facilitate dietary diversity by reducing cooking times and also increasing cooking efficiency. They can also improve food safety by ensuring food is properly cooked and that water is properly boiled. And finally, again, under bioenergy use, the paper talks about the use of bioenergy in refrigerated transport and storage, or cold chains. And specifically, the paper looks at the use of biogas, which is the product of anaerobic digestion of wet biomass, in food transport and in the cold chain, and it investigates how it can present a sustainable alternative to fossil fuels for meeting energy demand of refrigerated agricultural supply chains. So in terms of nutrition, this can prevent spoilage of food and therefore improve food safety. It can also improve dietary diversity in isolated areas where grid electricity maybe doesn't arrive. And it can also have a number of other positive impacts that could indirectly affect nutrition security. Some of these which we've already mentioned, for example, having positive impacts on soil quality through the use of the digestate, the byproduct of anaerobic digestion, reductions in indoor air pollution, fertilizer use and efficiency, and food loss, and also GHG emissions. This area is still very much understudied, although FAO, through the energy team and its investor project, has investigated its feasibility for a couple of cases. So therefore, it represents a really interesting area for future research. So on to the conclusions. The findings from the articles reviewed show evidence of multiple and indirect or implied linkages between bioenergy and nutrition. And by understanding these linkages, we can be better placed to provide recommendations on how the design and the implementation of bioenergy value chains can contribute to ensuring nutrition security. However, the paper evidence is that the research is still quite scarce, and there could be multiple areas for future research and investigation. One of the general questions that we could pose to ourselves as bioenergy and nutrition communities is, how can we leverage these linkages in the future to ensure that bioenergy production and use is contributing as fully as possible to nutrition security, also in terms of interactions also with climate change and biodiversity. And then some more specific technical questions on some of the stages of the value chain, thinking about the impacts on soil quality on nutrition. There are a number of different questions that we could ask about the impacts of soil quality on the nutritional quality and content of crops, and also on the impacts of the use of biochar and digestate on soil fertility. We could also ask some questions about the improved cook stoves. How can they be better deployed to rural communities, and how can the replacement of traditional cook stoves with improved cook stoves help facilitate dietary diversity? And then also, as I mentioned before, how does the use of biogas in the cold chain compare to traditional cold chain technologies in terms of energy efficiency, performance, cost-benefit analysis, for example? What is the potential for this technology, and what are the necessary conditions for its replication at broad scale? So these are the main findings of the paper. I'm really looking forward to discussing some of these conclusions with you during the discussion part of this webinar. But before that, I'm going to pass the floor to my colleague Tiziana Pirelli, who's an agronomist in the Climate Smart Agriculture team here in OCB and FAO, as well as working at the Centre for Agricultural Research and Economics, or CREA, here in Italy. And she's going to give us an example of some of the linkages that I've talked about, specifically in regards to small-scale gasification value chain. Again, if you have any questions that come up during her presentation, please feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll have question answers at the end. Thank you very much, and over to you, Tiziana.
Thank you very much, Connie. Let me try to share my screen. Okay, can you see it?
Yes. Perfect.
Thank you very much for, it's a pleasure for me to having this opportunity for talking about macrogasification value chain as a means to increase access to sufficient, safe and nutritious food. And I hope you will enjoy the presentation. But what is, let's start from what is microgasification. Microgasification is just a process, but when it is embedded in a value chain that I like to call biochar system or biochar value chain, it can bring several benefits to the local community that adopt it. So microgasification is the use of organic biomass, as you said in your presentation, solid and dry biomass to produce a mix of gases which are called the syngas, and at the same time produce a byproduct which is named biochar. So the syngas is burned, is combusted, but not the biomass, only the syngas, and is burned in a smokeless way, in the sense that it doesn't produce any smoke, and it reduces the amounts of air pollutants compared to the traditional tree-stone fires, and to the use of charcoal, and in particular reduce substantially the amount of carbon monoxide that is produced, of particulate matter, and reduce the exposure to women and children that are usually the ones in charge of cooking in the house, especially in developing countries in sub-Saharan Africa, reduce the exposure to smoke that usually cause in the long term pneumonia disease and blindness and other health disease. And this, this microgasifier that we can see here has been developed by the University of Udine, but it's just one of the many possible T-Lutz cooking stove that use residues, various types of residues, but also can use wood fuel chips and so on for cooking. The energy, the syngas, is burned for cooking purposes, and the biochar can be used to be buried into the soil to increase soil fertility through various mechanisms that we will see in the next slide. By increasing soil fertility, we have also an increase in crop production that can be translated in more available food and more available residues for cooking purposes again. So let me now go through the various benefits that this value chain can bring to the local community that use it. What is biochar? Biochar, as I said, is a byproduct, is rich in carbon. In it, it's stored the 80 it has 80–90% of carbon in its structure, and this carbon is stored in a particular, is particularly recalcitrant and can be stored into the soil for centuries or even for millennia. So at the beginning, biochar was studied for this property of being a carbon capture, means for carbon capture and storage. But then the scientists have seen that it increase also the quality of the soil and the productivity of the soil, and it has been discovered that it make it through various mechanisms. Biochar can in fact recycle the nutrients that were initially available in the biomass of origin, in the feedstock. So, for instance, if I use orchard trees pruning that have been previously fertilized, this biomass is rich in nutrients such as calcium, phosphorus, potassium, and these nutrients remains in the biochar and can be provided to the next crop, the one that arrives after that the biochar has been buried into the soil. This is valid for all nutrients, exception made for nitrogen, and that is lost during the gasification process. But also biochar can provide indirectly nutrients to the crops because it increases the cation exchange capacity of the soil, thus reducing the leaching of various nutrients, and in particular of the one that are present in the soil in the form of cations such as ammonium, calcium, and so on. But indirectly it increase also the availability of nutrients for plant uptake, such as when it is used in acidic soil, because it increases the pH of the soil, and this naturally, let's say that make more available some nutrients such as phosphorus, for instance, and molybdenum and calcium, which are more available when the pH is not very low. And it has been proved that in sandy soil it increases substantially the water holding capacity. So all these properties make the soil more fertile and more healthy. And this is why at the end it causes an increasing in crop production. As I said, biochar cannot deliver nitrogen, but it can be enriched with nitrogen. And for this reason, many times it is mixed with organic or with mineral nutrients, most of the time with compost or with manure or livestock residues. And it has been used for several purposes, and also, for instance, in this case is a innovative, let's say, toilet to avoid the leaching of nitrogen from human residues. That has been funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. But this is just an additional information, but I invite you to read this very interesting meta-analysis by Jeffrey et al. 2011, in which you can discover all the various properties of biochar in this analysis that report the results of many research conducted. Beyond biochar production, I want to highlight the main benefits, let's say, that derive from the use of this microgasifier. And in my opinion, it's the fact that it allows for cooking food, also when fuel in places where fuel is not available or where fuel is not affordable, because microgasification works with different type of waste and residues. And it allows indirectly for better nutrition, because cooked food is more can be digested more easily, and it allows for cooking food such as starchy food, cereal, potatoes, and other tubers that are the staple food in most of the developing countries, and also legumes, which allows for the availability of proteins and other nutrients such as carotenoids and lutein that are available only in cooked carrots and tomatoes. And then it allows, as Connie said, also to increase the availability of food and to overcome the seasonality, the seasonal availability of food by increasing the opportunity to conserve the food. How? Because cooking food reduce the load of microbes that could be present both in food and in water, and it reduces the risk of foodborne illnesses. And so it's extremely important to have the possibility to choose about cooking or not cooking the food. And to cook, as I said, it's important to have fuel available and fuel affordable. And as I said, microgasification gives the opportunity to use various types of residues and waste that normally doesn't have a value. But for instance, agricultural residues, agroforestry residues, agroindustrial residues, and forestry residues. And this can be used as such, or can be transformed, pre-treated, for obtaining improved feedstock such as chips, pellets, and briquettes that have a major efficiency compared to the raw material. And this allows to replace charcoal, to replace wood fuel, so for a better environment and forestry conservation, but allows also to women and children who are the ones in charge of collecting fuel wood, that is an extremely time-consuming activity, to have the possibility to dedicate their time to other type of activities such as schooling or children caring, or also other high-income activities such as working in other business. And also is an alternative to LPG, because we have seen in this study that we have conducted together with the GBEP from 2018 to 2020, and it has been published by FAO. This International Dialogue on Forest Landscape Restoration and Wood Energy, you can read that is also a microgasification, an alternative to the use of LPG, because LPG is quite expensive, and the vendors to refill the charge are difficult to reach. So also in this case, achieving and fuel is quite difficult and time consuming. And we have also seen during our study that there are opportunities for creating jobs in producing improved feedstock. And as you can see in this picture, in Ghana, there are a few small medium entrepreneurs who started the production of this improved feedstock to feed the stoves. But other job opportunities can come from building the stove itself, because compared to other LPG cooking and stoves, these stoves can be built in loco, and the drawings, for instance, of this burner by the University of Udine is available online, can be downloaded. And building the stoves in loco can bring to new income opportunities, and having new income can improve the well-being, and people can buy new and diversified type of food. Another futures, positive futures of this system is that it can be adapted to traditional cooking habits, such as, for instance, in Ghana, having one burner was not sufficient. So they asked for building stoves with two burners, because they cook fufu, that is a starchy food, staple starchy food typical of Ghana, and they cook it together with meat or together with the sauce. So one burner was not enough, but it can be also scaled up for cooking in hospital and school canteens, for cooking a larger amount of food. And I would also like to remind that the gasification can be also scaled up for various energy production purposes, for instance, for electricity production. And this is a plant that is in northern Italy, indeed, for electricity production via syngas production. Let me say that the biogas system has been analyzed deeply by FAO in 2016-2018, and the results of this analysis have been published in 2018 in this publication, that is Lessons Learned on the Sustainability and Replicability of Integrated Food and Energy Systems in Ghana and in Mozambique. This study analyzed and give the green light and recognize the high value of this integrated food and energy system based on the use of pigeon pea or corn cobs pellets as feedstock as a fuel for cooking production, for cooking purposes. And I also invite you to read the chapter that go more deeply into the detail of microgasification, published in 2019 in biogas anaerobic digestion, gasification, and non-OECD countries. This chapter goes more into the detail and explain how bioenergy and modern bioenergy can contribute to achieve SDG 2, SDG 7, SDG 12, and SDG 13. But let me also take this opportunity to briefly mention another biogas system that shall be integrated in agricultural production, agricultural farms and livestock farms. That is biogas. Biogas is another bioenergy pathways. It can produce heat and other types of energy, but also heat for cooking and electricity for lighting purposes, starting from waste and residues from the activity of raising livestock, for instance. And the digestate, that is a byproduct of this process, can be used to enrich the soil with organic matter and other type of nutrients. I also, in this case, invite you, because we do not have enough time, to read this book that has been published by GBEP in 2019, or if I'm not wrong, going to the late 2018, where the biogas value chain at small scale and at large scale level were analyzed in Vietnam, where there are already 450,000 biogas household plants installed, for each of having almost a capacity of 10 cubic meters, and that helps household to cook and lightening their house, and that is fed with pig manure waste and residues. Let me conclude by saying that, yes, we have seen how sustainable and modern bioenergy can contribute to achieve the 4 betters at the heart of the FAO Strategic Framework 2022-2030. We have seen that the byproducts can be used to increase production and to increase the health, the soil health, but can also enhance, increase the amount of food produced, and allows for better nutrition of food by allowing, by providing affordable energy and accessible energy for all, and can also contribute to a better environment by reducing air pollutants and reducing the amount of nutrients that leaches in the groundwater, and finally allows for new job opportunity and guaranteeing a better life. Thank you very much. I also remain available, as Connie, for any question you may have.
Thanks so much, Tiziana, for that more detailed look on the small-scale gasification and all of the extra resources that people can go and look at if they have interest in those specific things. So if we now have about 15-20 minutes for a discussion. Michela has posted also in the chat the literature review that I presented, that's available on the GBEP website and has been developed by our colleagues in the Food and Nutrition Division, by Patrizia Fragasti, Tomoko Kato, and also Caitlin McGuinness. So please feel free to go and read that if you're interested. And now we have time for a discussion. So if anyone would like to post questions in the chat, or you're also welcome to raise your hand, not just for questions, if you have any comments or observations on these links, anything that we might have missed, or any opportunities for future work, we'd be very interested to hear from you. Whilst we're waiting for people to post some questions, I actually wanted to invite Katrina Chan to speak a little bit, because Katrina has been doing some research on some of the areas that we in our literature review did not focus on, which were the opposite causal implications of changes in nutrition and diet on bioenergy value chains. So I'm just going to allow Katrina, maybe if you could take the floor and maybe give us a 2-minute overview of some of the research that you've been doing, because I think it gives us the other side of these linkages.
Yeah, I can do that. Yeah, so as Connie mentioned, I'm looking at basically how nutrition affects bioenergy, so the opposite way there. While this work is really in its first stages, we have found that, for example, when so this is actually specifically for Germany, and we found that when the German population transitions to 25% vegan diet within the population, this actually increases the greenhouse gas abatement from bioenergy by approximately 13%. And this is mainly due to the increase of feedstocks that can be used for bioenergy. And we've also looked at how this transition to more sustainable diets, so diets that have less greenhouse gas emissions and also, for example, less energy and less land use, can also lead to then more land becoming available within Germany that can be used, for example, for afforestation or for growing more diverse bioenergy crops, or for land conservation for biodiversity, for example. And there is a varied effect depending on how much of the population actually shifts. But for example, if just 50% of the population switches to a vegan vegetarian diet, for example, this actually then reduces the land use by 13% in Germany. So this is only 15% of the population. So there is an impact there.
Thanks so much, Katerina. I think that's it's really interesting to see the other side of what we're not focusing on these linkages, but where further work and research is ongoing. So I wonder whether anyone else wanted to make any comments or any observations on the linkages. If you do, please feel free to raise your hand. In the meantime, I actually have a question for our colleague Tiziana. If you'd like to put your video back on, Tiziana, because I was wondering, you talked a lot about obviously the positive linkages there on the microgasification value chain, but I wonder what you think are the main policies, or what you think is needed to ensure that this can be adopted more widely and we can really make the most of these opportunities.
Yes, so sure. Of course, for instance, we study in sub-Saharan Africa and the opportunities to introduce such type of a burner. But in any case, these burners have a cost compared to the use of charcoal or the use of fuel wood as fuel. And okay, this cost it's not about the fuel, because we saw that we can use residues, but it's about the stoves. And but the cost is similar, if not even reduced compared to LPG stoves. But in any case, it requires some incentives for and some help, financial help from the government, from the policymaker, that needs to recognize the high value of these microgasification systems, and somehow, yes, to incentivize at least the stoves, or distributing the stoves, for instance, to local people, or incentivize activities that produce the stove itself, and so on, to favor the leverage, yes, of this tool, the adoption of this tool at local level. And of course, increasing the awareness on the various benefits would be also very useful through information campaign and training of trainers, and so on. But it requires the support of local government and decision makers. For sure, this is still missing. Let me also add that this system is, of course, shall be fine-tuned at local level and adapted, let's say, to the various type of feedstock that are available at local level. So for sure, it requires a phase to study what type of biomass is locally available and what type of, for instance, what type of food and which are the traditional cooking habits and how to adapt it to the traditional cooking habits, because it's extremely important also to take this into account.
I guess really there's two main points there in terms of awareness raising of the benefits, and also vice versa, awareness raising of the local necessities in terms of the cooking as well. So hopefully this kind of work where we're bringing together a lot of different stakeholders is the right start on that, and we can continue to work to try and raise awareness of these issues. If you stay with me, Tiziana, I see another question in the chat that's specifically talking about biochar, so I'm going to put that one to you. It's from Jan7. He says, I learned that it's highly dependent on the way biochar is produced, if its application is useful for soil quality and especially for long-term carbon storage. Has this been tested for biochar for small-scale facilities?
Yes, it has been tested, and it's good that Jan raised these issues, because biochar is not always good for being used as a soil amendment, let's say, or can be used as a soil amendment, but has not always the same properties, because as you said, Jan, its quality depends on the type of feedstock that is used. For instance, if I use feedstock that comes from let's say forestry residues, it is more rich in carbon. Probably it will have a higher carbon content, around 90%, but it doesn't have nutritional properties, because the forestry didn't receive any type of fertilization. And if instead of fuel wood I use, for instance, other types of such as wood from pruning orchards or other type of wood, that I can obtain a different type of product. And not all biochar are the same, and but it has been proved that the one produced with microgasification, I mean, can be used, doesn't have a high amount of ashes. But of course, the amount of ashes again depends from the type of raw material, of feedstock. But for instance, with such, I mean, normally the process, yes, it's can produce good biochar if it's fed with good feedstock. For instance, palm oil kernel shells have been proved to give good efficiency in terms of energy production, but the biochar that is produced is not of the best quality. So it's extremely important to study the effects of the different type of feedstock and in the different type of soil in which the biochar is applied.
Jan also has a second question. He says, thanks Tiziana in the chat as well for that. He has another question on phytoremediation. He says, phytoremediation needs decades to be successful. Nevertheless, it's often the only viable way to clean soils from harmful pollution and surely should be supported. I wonder what pathways would be suitable to use feedstock derived from such measures. So in the paper itself, we don't specifically mention the bioenergy pathways that this feedstocks could be used for. We mentioned some useful green plants that could be then used as energy crops. But it is true that, as I mentioned in my presentation, it's important then to be careful with the use of the biomass to ensure that there's not accumulation of the contaminants in the biomass itself. So, for example, the biomass from phytoremediation activities are usually not suitable, for example, for gasification and then the application of biochar, for example. But for example, GBEP has done some other investigations on these different pathways that could be useful. For example, in Italy, for second generation ethanol from reeds and from grasses. And there the process of the production of the bioenergy is such that the contaminants from the industrial activities were removed during the process, were not accumulating. So there are a number of different bioenergy pathways. It will depend on the different area, the different contaminants that are there, whether it's heavy metals or other pollutants. But certainly there are a lot of different pathways that can be used, but unfortunately that was not something that we went into detail in the paper, but could be very interesting to, I agree, to investigate further in the future. So we have a couple more minutes and just time for one more question again for you, Tiziana, for the small scale gasification. So in terms of scalability, Patrizia, did you compare feasibility of solutions in different settings? For example, in more densely populated settings, such as peri-urban areas or refugee communities?
Yes, we have also evaluated, especially in a few countries in Sub-Saharan Africa, the use of these microgasification scaled up for meeting the requirements of different settings. The limitations, let's say, factor is the availability of biomass, because the stove, they can be produced and they can be distributed in loco directly. For biomass availability, for instance, it's a limitation factor in refugee camps, for instance, because it's important to understand what type of biomass is available and the amount that is available, because but it's very easy to calculate, because each stove is not refilled continuously. So one stove has a charge, let's say 2.5 kilogram for a family of 5 people. So it's quite easy to understand how biomass is needed, how much biomass is needed once we know the type of biomass and the type of food, because with the 2.5 kilogram, for instance, of pellet, corn cobs pellets, one can cook for 2 hours, and it's quite easy to understand. The problem and the limitation factor is always in the biomass availability, but what we have noticed, for instance, that it has helped to develop a new business, because for instance, the people started in Ghana collecting the biomass from the countryside, and bringing this biomass to these small medium enterprises, which were transforming it into pellet, and having some pellet and changing this biomass for some pellets, and so it starts also a business of collecting these residues, which previously had no value. So people start bringing the residues from the countryside to the urban settings, because in the urban settings they can sell their product. And in the urban setting, for instance, we saw that women, for instance, like to buy in the market a small amount for a daily charge, for instance, go to the market and buy 2.5 kilogram of residues or of pellet for cooking. And they have been also packed for the purpose. So it has been quite interesting seeing that this new business started, where we try to introduce the value chain.
Thanks so much, Tiziana. So I think we've come to the end of our time now for the webinar. Thank you very much for all of your availability and your contributions today. And I'd like to specifically thank as well our colleagues again from the Food and Nutrition Division, Patrizia and Tomoko, for let's say initiating this collaboration between GBEP in the Office of Climate Change and Environmental Biodiversity, and also the Food and Nutrition Division. We hope that we'll be able to continue this discussion again in the future, and that you will enjoy being part of this discussion. And thank you very much again. Michele, if you have any final words. No? Okay. Well, thank you very much again. Thank you to Tiziana as our speaker as well, and have a good rest of the day. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.